and welcome to day 3 of Consciousness Central, the daily show coming to you from the Science of Consciousness Conference 2017 here in San Diego. I'm your host, Nick Day. Stay with us for today's program. Welcome. So I'd like to welcome to Consciousness Central IVETTE Fuentes. IVETTE is visiting us from Nottingham in the UK. You are a professor. Your field is quantum physics.
Yes.
And here we are. You're at the Science of Consciousness Conference. Can you tell me what brought you here?
Okay. Well, thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you well as in the conference. Wow. So yes, it's a bit of a surprise to me to find myself here. Because, as you said, I'm a quantum physicist and I work in the overlap with general relativity, but I haven't really ever addressed the question of consciousness. And I'm here because Roger Penrose invited me to join as a founding member for the new Penrose Institute because of my proposals to use quantum systems to measure gravitational effects, which might have let's say, which might be relevant for what he's thinking about, which he hopes to explain consciousness with. But it has a funny story to it, actually, because when I was a high school student, I had very clear what I wanted to do with my career. So I knew that I wanted to understand how, from the interaction of atoms or molecules or neurons, thought emerged and consciousness emerged. I had that really, really clear as an 18-year-old. And I went around asking people, what do I have to study to understand this question? And well, in spite of my aunts being psychologists, and I had an uncle that was a doctor, my father himself studied physics, nobody could point me in the right direction, same teachers. So I eventually gave up, and I said, well, okay, I'll study physics, because that's interesting enough. And then I did a PhD in quantum information. And once I finished my PhD and I was about to give a public lecture, I was preparing the lecture. I was trying to explain to people what information processing is, and I gave as an example the brain. I said, in neurons, they, talk to each other, and this is how thought is generated. And then I realized that I had learned something, which was quantum information processing, and that if there was quantum effects in the brain, and I thought, well, why not? It would actually be quite cool. Then maybe what I've learned will be applicable to that question that I had when I was 18. So I got excited about that, but of course I didn't do anything about it because I had already started to follow another path, which was to understand the overlap of quantum metrology, quantum information with general relativity. And then I met Roger Penrose some years after, and he got very interested in my proposals. And then it turns out that he invites me to join the Institute, and that the Institute is about consciousness. And I was like, this is so funny how, life can go around circles and you end up right in front of what you wanted to do as a young person. So
that's an amazing story. It really is. There's something wonderful about that.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm thrilled to hear you're part of the Penrose Institute. We're very excited about that here because of our association with Roger, and he's obviously known in the field of consciousness for his work with Stuart Hameroff, who is, of course, the founder of this conference. So, looking at Orch-OR, Orchestrated Objective Reduction Theory of Consciousness, which is Penrose Hameroff, do you, number one, how does that strike you as a quantum physicist? And number two, you're bringing to it something new, I gather, which is why Roger is somehow inviting you in. So
yes.
Can you
Yes.
Tell us about it.
Well, there's obviously a problem in our understanding of physics because, well, we, on one hand, to describe the microscopic world, we have quantum mechanics, and we have tested the theory in so many experiments and always successfully, so there's obviously something that works very well there. On the other hand, we have general relativity that explains the large scales where you have galaxies, planets, and so on. And that has also been tested. You know, we detected, well, people who detected gravitational waves last year, so a great success at testing the predictions of general relativity. However, we don't understand physics at the regimes where you would expect both quantum effects and relativistic effects to be present. So there is sort of a gap in our understanding and in our theories and so on. So what Roger proposes is that the collapse of the wave function in quantum mechanics occurs due to gravitational effects. And this is also addresses a very important question that we have in quantum mechanics, which is that we don't understand how to make measurements. Well, it's not that we don't understand. We know that you have a deterministic evolution in quantum mechanics given by the Schrödinger equation. And then when you're learning about quantum mechanics, you just learn that, well, you make measurements by applying these operators, which is no longer deterministic, and it's sort of a patch. It's just a prescription, and this gives you the right outcomes, and you can test with the experiments that works. But we don't really understand why measurements are done in that way. So Roger doesn't like that at all, and well, in science, we call that the measurement problem because, you know, nobody really understands how that goes. So Roger's proposal of the collapse sort of addresses that question. Now, the part where he says that is related to consciousness, that is the side of his theories that I know nothing about. It's something new to me. But what's not new to me is working with physics at this overlap. And what I've been trying to do is develop technologies that would allow you to investigate nature in those regimes. So to give you an example, humankind came up with the idea of a telescope, right? So then we built telescopes, and then we used them to look at the universe, and we found galaxies, we found all these things that we didn't know were there. Same with microscopes. You build a microscope, and then you look at atoms, and you learn about atomic physics, and so on. So what I'm trying to do is develop a technology that will allow you to investigate nature in the overlap where quantum mechanics and general relativity would take place. And then I want to use these technologies, again, to look into nature with these eyes, and then finally try to understand how nature would behave there. And these sort of devices would also be very useful to understand things like the collapse of the wave function due to gravity and so on. And that's why Roger is so interested in them.
Last question, and hopefully not too much of a weird one for you, but in your most reflective moments, I'll just say mine, for example, sometimes I contemplate what is the reality of the color blue and what is the reality of light. Actually they're quantum, photons are quantum particles. So my world comes to me through the quantum world. The color blue, I have no idea how that arises. That's what's known in consciousness studies as qualia, the qualia of blue. It's just the pure experience of it. Same with music, I have no idea. These are all things that we kind of don't really know what they are.
Yeah.
And we don't, in a way, know what reality is. We have our reality, our subjective view of the world, but it's obviously, it's specific to us. Does this keep you awake at night?
Well,
So
look, how I describe this is that I have my day job. Mm-hmm. My day job is to be a quantum scientist, and I know what the rules of the game there is. I know what I have to do to make, good science and so on. But after my day job is done, and I did things in the way I know how to have scientific rigor and so on, when I come home, I'm constantly thinking about what am I doing here? Who am I? What's this reality? Is it really what I learned at university, or is there more to it, and so on? And this is, of course, something that I don't know if I would say it bothers me to some extent, because it feels strange to be alive and to move in this world without really knowing what it is.
That's wonderful.
So I constantly think about it.
I think that's why we're all here, actually. We're kind of, what is this? It's a mystery, and we're just so drawn into it. I think it's such a wonderful journey. Yvette, thank you so much for talking to us this afternoon. Good luck with everything. We're going to obviously follow the progress of the Penrose Institute, because we're very close to Roger and Stuart, and hopefully we'll see you in Tucson. In next year for the Science of Consciousness 2018.
Great, yes, hopefully one of these days I will have something to present in the
Yes, we're looking forward to that.
area. Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yvette Fuentes.
So I'm here with Arya. Arya's got a pretty interesting project. Tell me what's going on with your project here, Arya.
So in our schools in India, I was in DPS, which was one of Delhi's top schools. So we were to study subjects such as moral education and work experience. Then when I shifted to DEI, I realized that similar values were being implemented, but on a larger scale. A scale so large that the students were responding differently or behaving differently. So I set out to find how it was different and why it was different. So we came across some experts who gave us ideal values in a student, and then we formed a questionnaire. And then we tested the questionnaire in a pilot study, which showed us that the questionnaire was working perfectly fine. Now, how do you implement it on a large scale? So we did a final research on 120 students, all in Agra. So there were two within my own university, and there were two out of our university. So while the scores in the questionnaire will look and the mean will look very similar, but when you put it through a z-test, a statistical test, it showed us that the probability of them becoming similar was 0.004, which means that they are far, far apart. So there are ways, there are techniques in our university which is changing the values in the students for the better. So they are just behaving differently.
Interesting. So if you do the questionnaire test, the statistics tell you that everyone's very different from one another. And yet when they're in the school, the environment allows them the opportunity to behave
So in our environment, in the way they are put into our school, and there are ways to put into another private school. So in our school, people, and when they are put into actual daily life, they behave differently. They are more tending towards others, more caring for others. If a person has, for example, punctured a wheel of his bicycle, they will stay till the bicycle is repaired, not leave without their friend. That type of bond is there. So
education is really important, man.
Education is important, but how education is implemented and how values are being implemented with education to change the personality of the person is all.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for talking with us. So I'm here with Paul. Paul, tell me what's going on with your exhibition here.
Well, I've been asked to put the work that I've been working on called Quantum Consciousness. And what you can see behind us is the work, and the work is based on data from working with the team that are building the quantum computer. So this is an electron that's firing in its block position. So this direct data from actually affecting an electron.
Wow.
But what makes it more interesting is that this specific data set is me reading to an electron. So I asked them if I could use my voice and read to the electron, because the electron is affected by a microwave signal. So if you can transfer an audio signal to a microwave signal, then you could then let it affect the electron to make it spin. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And aesthetically, I mean, it looks like a real-time mashup of Picasso and Dali having like a freak out in their brain. I mean, it's got some interesting aesthetic qualities too.
It's trying to simulate the idea that thoughts are happening, because in the quantum computer that's where it's firing, and therefore that's where it's processing data. So I'm trying to make an analogous relationship to your brain, because they're using phosphorus and silicon to do the quantum computer, and you have phosphorus and silicon in your body. So the chances are that then there's a similarity between us and the quantum computer. But the potential is the quantum computer is going to act a lot faster than your brain. So then there's also a critical dimension of how we're going to work with this. So this is like how maybe ideas are forming in your brain now, and then when you actually speak them, only one idea might come out of your mouth. So it's trying to do that. And if you listen to the sound, which you can't really hear, but if you put your microphone near it, you can hear me talking, and you can hear the background noise of the microwave signal.
Hello.
Different quantum. This is describe this.
Just playing around with it. Thank you so much.
So I'd like to welcome to Consciousness Central JOSCHA Bach. JOSCHA deals in theories of mind. Am I right in saying that?
Well, I'm a cognitive scientist, and
right.
I do take my perspective on the mind from artificial intelligence. I think it's our best bet to understand the nature of our minds.
And where are you doing your research?
At the moment, I'm based at the Harvard Program for Evolutionary Dynamics in Cambridge, so basically in Boston. And it's a very inspiring place where MIT, Harvard, and many other things converge. A lot of very curious students and people that ask questions with fresh eyes and lots of brain power. So it's very inspiring to be there and develop and test theories together with others.
Great. So I gather yesterday you gave a talk on a theory of consciousness that perhaps some people will not be particularly familiar with, which is that consciousness is somehow a memory. Mm-hmm. And that probably isn't doing it justice. Could you expound on that a little bit?
I think there are a number of people which converged on similar ideas. For instance, Gary Drescher and Graciano and Daniel to some degree and so on. And the notion there is that we are not conscious in actuality. And the reason for us not being conscious in actuality has to do with the way our brain processes information. For instance, when we swallow a cup of tea and we feel the tea going down our throat, what's actually happening is that there are a few nerves that are stimulated by the liquid, and then they send signals to the brain, which takes some time, and they're processed in many ways. And eventually they end up as a simulation in the somatosensory cortex, which doesn't look anything like the physical process that took place, right? And that simulation is only available something between a few hundred milliseconds and several seconds after the fact. And we experience that simulation as being in the present. And not only being in the present by itself, but being in the same present as the movement that we made with our hand to get the cup to our mouth, and the clinking noise that we hear when the cup hits our teeth and something like this, right? And all these different modalities take different times to process. So how is it possible they're available at exactly the right time? So we can experience them right now in the present, even though these things happen at different points in time from the point of computation that took place in our brain in the past. And the easiest answer to this, well, they don't. This is only constructed retroactively and merged together. It's a patched together memory from different modalities, which never actually were available at the same time. They are only available at the same time in hindsight. You can remember that you felt how that went down, but you don't realize that this memory happens in the past, because your brain doesn't bother to tell you that it's already long past and that you're not experiencing the present, but you only remember having something, experience something that never happened in exactly the way you experienced something. So it means when you do something, like you take this cup and get it to your mouth, you don't do this with your consciousness. Your consciousness is not deciding anything. It's all kinds of reactive subsystems. So you don't drop your cup. Many of the decisions are made in your backbone or in your cerebellum and so on. And your consciousness is basically telling you a story that allows you to not make the same mistake twice, hopefully.
Right, good. So obviously something, if you've got several essentially disconnected activities taking place, somewhere they need to be formed into a coherent, what would we say, a conductor of an orchestra?
Yeah, so that has to do with the role of our attentional processes. I think that consciousness is largely a model of our own attentional processing. We have something like an orchestra playing out in our mind. We have all these different instruments that take care of the different modalities and that mostly work autonomously. You're only conscious of the things that require your attention, right? Everything that doesn't require attention anymore becomes unconscious. You just do it automatically with whatever neural operators you have entrained your brain with. And if they don't require conflict resolution anymore, they just work. And the conductor has a very small role in this. If you turn off the conductor, you become something like a sleepwalker. A sleepwalker can still act on impulses, get up at night, take something from the fridge, make dinner, walk on the street, answer questions, but there's nobody home. It doesn't make sense. There is no central cohesion in these actions, even though they might be finely orchestrated and articulated, but they're automatic, right? And the conductor is something that plays a similar role as a conductor in an orchestra. It takes care of what the instruments are doing by looking if there are conflicts, and then it listens to the superficial information that these instruments are giving forth. It doesn't get the depth of what the different instruments are doing. And it can only take care of maybe one or a couple at a time. It doesn't see what the whole orchestra is doing. So almost everything is almost always unconscious most of the time. And the orchestra is not only paying it, the conductor is not only paying attention, it puts these things in a protocol of what it attended to. And this protocol is the only place where experience is integrated. In order for you to talk about your experience in the different modalities, it's not sufficient that you have that experience. You also need to put it in one place. You could have, in principle, multiple consciousnesses in your mind, but how would you know? How would one consciousness that is right now talking to me know that another one exists? It can only know this if they share memory in just the right way to tell this thing that there's another thing there. And as it turns out, there is not one thing there. There are many, many things there. And we bind them together in one story. We are not just one person. We are many, many things which are not a person. And then we tell a story about this, which we perceive as a person. And when we access this protocol, we can recreate situations that were similar to the situation that played out back then when it happened. And we can also put the act that we acted on that protocol and that we remembered, that we recalled it into the protocol itself. And by putting the act that we access the protocol into the protocol, we can remember that we actually were aware of something, which I think is necessary and sufficient for reporting on awareness to yourself and others. So for a system to be conscious, it's necessary that this remembers what it was conscious a moment ago. It's also sufficient. You don't need to be conscious in actuality.
So consciousness is more like a continuum, or more, it is, when you say an orchestration of something, it's rather you're implying that music is the metaphor. Consciousness requires a memory of what went before for it to make sense.
The role of the conductor of this attentional system is the coordination of that orchestra. And the role of consciousness is recall on what this thing did. And so it has a protocol of what it did, and consciousness is basically what we call the access to that experience that the conductor had attended to. And then we have awareness of being aware, which is the next layer, which seems to be so mysterious for us, because how can we know that we are? How can we perceive ourselves as being there? And this is just that we take this action of accessing the protocol and put it in the protocol too.
So how would you define the self, the sense of I?
It's largely a story that the brain tells itself about itself. And usually the story gets united with a model of who we are in this world. And most people have a model that they are something like a hairless monkey that has grammatical language, that's part of a social group, and we identify with this. We confuse ourselves with being a monkey, right? But we are not monkeys, we are minds. We are the side effect of the regulation needs of a monkey. A mind can go anywhere, it doesn't need to care about the monkey. I just happen to run on the brain of that monkey. But I'm not that monkey. I'm something more general. And the monkey creates urges and impulses, emotions that seem to be extremely relevant to me. So I care about that monkey and confuse myself with it. But if I manage to turn off these emotions and desires and memories, I realize, why should I care?
Final question. What is the recipe for happiness? What makes us happy?
That's a very interesting and deep question. I suspect that the Eastern religions are about wireheading, about finding ways to reprogram your brain in useful ways. It's very hard to define useful ways. All these monks don't have many children. it's probably useful for them. I mean, having children is a big hassle. It probably makes you unhappy at some level, but you also have a need that you need to fulfill. But you can just, if you wire it, you can turn off that need, and you don't need children anymore, and you just focus on the things that make you happy, like meditating, having insight, hanging out with the other monks, right? And then you game society. They bring you breakfast every morning because you are holy men and build you nice temples on the mountaintop. These poor agricultural societies didn't know what hit them. In some sense, it's the next step of evolution, but since you don't have many kids, it's probably parasitic in a way. But it makes people happy. I think monks are largely very happy if they do this right. And for us, there are balances. If you don't want to game your motivational system, you need to get your needs met, which means you need to understand who you are and what you need and why, and have agencies about your beliefs. So that's probably what you need to do. You need to carve out a life in which your needs are met in a healthy way, and you have to understand what they are. There's healthy social relationships, belonging, good food and water, sky to look at, maybe some grass from time to time, not too much delayed gratification that is purely symbolic. So if you do a PhD or all these other things, you should do them on the side. This is not the content of your life. Don't believe in the story. Focus on the experience, because the present is the only thing that can nurture you, not the stories.
And the present is the past anyway.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Kind of.
Somehow.
Yeah.
JOSCHA Bach, thank you so much. That's a lot of fun. I appreciate your time. Thank you. So here we are on day 3 of the Science of Consciousness conference in San Diego. Once again, we're going over to Cameron to find out what's been going on at the plenary sessions. Cameron, anything new?
Yeah, we had 3 plenary sessions today. We had one on cosmology and consciousness, we had one on music perception and the brain, and another on neuroscience topics. The one on cosmology and consciousness was by some quantum gravity researchers and physicists. IVETTE Fuentes talked about where classical physics breaks down, and then the difficulties between reconciling relativity theory and quantum gravity theories, quantum physics theories. But she described some experiments that you could do to utilize quantum gravity in a practical way. So she described a set of experiments where you go into space where there's no atmosphere and things are very cold, which are good conditions for supercooling some gases that you could put in a little box. And then you could use these Bose-Einstein condensates to then detect gravitational waves, which happen when black holes collide together. They send something at the speed of light, and if you can detect them, then it can help you find out about what the early universe was like, how black holes behave, etc. So the music and the brain plenary was really interesting because Elaine Chu is not just a music researcher, but she's also a very talented musician. So she was able to demonstrate all of the theoretical approaches that she was talking about. She described how complicated music is, where you have tone and pitch and rhythm and dozens of different categories that you need in order to study music comprehensively, the structure of it. And then they can use that to program it into computers to allow computers to create new music, but they can also use it to study how the brain processes musical perception and aesthetic experience. So, for example, she described a set of experiments where you sit down at a piano and someone that can sight read classical music tries to play a complicated piece of music that they've never seen before. And then by analyzing really closely the transcripts of that performance, you can find out how the choices that the brain is making to process like pitch and tone and rhythm and all those things. She even connected it at the end she said, why is it that we can understand so well all these choices that are made when a performer is playing music to us? She says it's actually the heartbeat and our experience of the heartbeat from the time that we're in the womb to growing up. We know that the heartbeat changes pace sort of slightly erratically sometimes, and so we can accept when we hear a musical performance that the player isn't playing it by the book, that they sort of choose to go slow at some points and fast at another, whereas a computer would just go right according to the book. So, and then Scott McKay described using EEG studies to study aesthetic experience and emotional experience. So by, for example, taking an EEG and asking people to cultivate certain kinds of emotions, if the EEG is specific enough, and if you clean up the data and try to find out where the source of the EEG signal is coming from, you can provide a detailed map of where some of the locations in the brain are that give different emotional and aesthetic experiences. So the cosmology, or the neuroscience plenary picked up on some of the EEG studies and carried it further. We had Stephen Grossberg, who is a sort of titan in the neuroscience world from Boston University, talk about his adaptive resonance theory. One of his key points is that the brain shouldn't be looked at like a typical computer, where you have memory stored over here and your hard drive over here and your CPU over here. Studying the brain as a modular computer like that doesn't actually account for the data. He's saying the data suggests that there's this sort of, he calls it complementary computing that happens, where instead of these modular pieces, you have these distributed networks in a bunch of different brain regions that are all in feedback with each other and sort of dynamically over time. And that's what allows us to get along in the world, to grasp at objects and to do all the things that we need to do. So George Northoff next, he talked about the importance of studying in EEG much slower frequencies than what we usually do with the delta waves and gamma waves and all these things. He's saying these, he calls them infra-slow waves, which is at like 0.01 hertz to 1 hertz. Like these things that can take sometimes 50 seconds just to go through one sort of brain wave. He thinks that it's like a Russian doll scenario with brain waves, that the faster brain waves like gamma waves and that these are supported by these much slower waves, and that you really need to have these very slow waves in order to be conscious. And so he said that in vegetative patients you lose this slow wave activity. In anesthesia you lose this slow wave activity. So he described the importance of having these very slow brain waves in order to have an interactive relationship, conscious relationship to the world. And then finally, Philip Lowe talked about new methods of cleaning up EEG data so that you can capture things that you otherwise would never be able to see. And then it really opens up, using new mathematical techniques, a whole area, new industry basically of EEG studies, where you can just put a very small EEG monitor on someone's forehead and be able to tell in really great detail where the brain activity is originating, sort of how it's propagating over time, and you can do it basically in real time. So he described they're helping Stephen Hawking, the famous physicist, try to recover some mental communication with the world, even though he has Lou Gehrig's disease and may eventually lose his speech. If you could have a very precise EEG monitor and then have a kind of lexicon, a kind of vocabulary that you develop over years, then even if Stephen Hawking loses his speech, he could still be able to communicate sort of more or less in real time with the world. So these, on the whole, a wide range of topics discussed, but some really promising research, some really exciting, interesting thoughts.
Wonderful. Quantum computers in space, or quantum detectors in space, what we can learn from sight reading piano music and slow waves of EEG. Just another typical day here at the Science of Consciousness Conference. Cameron, once again, excellent. We'll see you this time tomorrow for day 4, and that's it for now.
This one's called Physicality. What about the dreams we had? What about the thoughts we escaped to? What about the things we hide just to fake it through the truth? Lock down my heart, caught in a moment, I'm guided towards the spark. Cross-touch my tongue, I want it, but I'm trying too hard. Oh, I'm not a body in my mind. Black hole, dark ice grip me from the inside. Stardust, cosmic light, say my flesh is strong enough to make it through the night. Deep dream gives folly. Is this escape from physicality? Stardust, cosmic light, say my flesh is strong enough to tell me what feels right. Whatever the dreams we have, whatever the worlds we'd escape to, when our blood flow is weaker and our days are few, will we look back and see the truth? Handcuffed my mind, I'm unraveling, I try to fight back time. Gouge up my eyes, only see myself, so I might as well be blind. I'm not a body in my mind. Black hole, dark eyes grip me from the inside. Stardust, cosmic light, say my flesh is strong enough to make it through the night. Deep dream is folly. Is this escape from physicality? Stardust, cosmic light, say my skin is thick enough to tell me what feels right. Black hole, dark eyes, say my heart is wise enough to lead me to the light. Thank you so much.
So that just about wraps it for another day here at Consciousness Central. We hope you've enjoyed today's program. Join us again tomorrow for another edition from the Science of Consciousness Conference 2017 here in San Diego. Bye for now.
Thank you.